Hi, my name is Brissa Willis, and in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about a 3-hour training course that I designed for teaching differentiated instruction in upper elementary. And differentiated instruction can be taught in both math and reading, and my primary focus was in reading. And before I even move on with how I designed my training course, I do want to identify what exactly differentiated instruction is. If you are in education, you are very familiar with the term. However, if you're not in education, you may not be quite sure what differentiated instruction is. So in education, teachers pull a small group of students to their table and they reteach a standard to that student's level. And the way that teachers do that is through collecting data. And the data can be collected through summative or formative assessments, and those assessments can be ones that the teacher designed themselves, or the assessments can be ones that the state or the district is requiring the teacher to use. In order to ensure that the training that I was designing was going to truly support educators in teaching differentiated instruction in upper elementary, I had to make sure that I went through the 5 stages of the 80 model step by step. So I did analysis, design, development, implementation, and finally evaluation. So in the analysis stage, the very first thing that I did is I met with my client and we discussed the problems that my client was currently seeing with the training that's already available for teachers for differentiated instruction. And the two biggest problems that my client mentioned was the first one is that the training is not engaging. When educators go to the trainings, it seems as though it's just like a chore they have to do. They're not excited about it because they know that a majority of the time the training for DI is just someone standing in front of a screen and then going through it, and then that's it. And that's not fun for teachers to have to sit through, especially if your training is done either during planning or after school. The second problem that my client has noticed is that there's no follow-up. There's no check-in to see how you're doing. There's no observations done to make sure that what you are doing in DI is what you were taught during the training. And so those were the two problems that my client brought to my attention, and those were the two things that I kept in the back of my mind as I was going through the 80 model. After talking about the problems, we then moved on to discussing, well, what kind of goals do we want to have for our teachers? What are 2 things that we want our teachers to be able to do successfully by the end of the training? And the 2 goals that my client and I came up with was, first, we want teachers to be able to implement differentiated instruction in their classroom. And then secondly, we also want teachers to be able to execute not only appropriate resources, but also appropriate technology to support their students. After discussing with my client the 2 goals that we wanted our learners to be able to accomplish by the end of the training, we then moved on to talking about what 5 objectives do we want teachers to be able to achieve by the end of the training as well. And the 5 objectives that we came up with were apply, select, analyze, design, and identify. With applying, we want teachers to be able to apply appropriate differentiated instruction strategies and techniques to their small group. We want teachers to be able to appropriately select technology and/or resources to support students in a small group. We want teachers to be able to analyze data collected through DI and identify how to adjust DI groups with the data collected. We also want the teacher to be able to design appropriate DI activities and lessons. And then finally, we want the teachers to be able to identify how to group students appropriately for differentiated instruction. After my client and I had discussed the problems that she was seeing and we discussed the objectives and goals of the training, we then could move on to the next step of the 80 model, which is design. And in design, I took everything that my client mentioned to me into consideration with all the activities that I designed. The first activity that I did was called Data Wars, and Data Wars achieved goal number 1 and learning objectives 1, 3, and 4. During Data Wars, these were the two resources that are used. The first one is called the tracking sheet, and this is what displays all of the data collected in this scenario. So what's given to the teacher, and this is important, is the goal and the objective. So in this scenario, when the teacher was collecting data, the teacher was looking that the student was able to apply summarizing techniques for nonfiction stories. And the teacher tracked the data by placing check marks in the boxes of what the student knew. So for instance, Skywalker, Luke, and Princess Leia, they were all able to identify the somebody of the nonfiction story. And then Luke, Princess Leia, and Chewbacca were able to identify the wanted component of a nonfiction story. So after teachers look at the data, they then need to brainstorm how would they group these students based off of this data. After they would brainstorm, they then would get this sheet of paper down below, and they would write down the names of the students that would be in each group. They would also write down, well, what would each group focus on? Because every group might focus on something different. And then finally, the teachers will need to brainstorm what kind of activities are they wanting to use, or what technology are they wanting to integrate during differentiated instruction. And the activities, like the resources and the technology, may all be different, or they may all be the same. And so after all of this is done, teachers come back together and they discuss as a whole group, why did they group the students that they did? Why did they choose the focus that they did? And why did they decide to integrate certain resources and technology for the activities? The second activity that was designed was called Technology and Resources, and this achieves Goal 2 and Learning Objectives 2, 5, and 6. The purpose of the Technology and Resource activity is to inform educators of platforms that are out there for them to integrate into their differentiated instruction. I chose 3 platforms because I didn't want to overwhelm educators with a lot of information. And also, along with each platform, there's a discussion on the benefits and challenges of each. The final activity designed is called What Would You Do? And this activity accomplishes all objectives and goals. During the What Would You Do activity, educators are applying what they've learned through the past 2 activities, and they're presented with scenarios like the one displayed on the screen. And so a majority of the scenarios is data, because data is what drives differentiated instruction. And so educators are given data, and they're supposed to identify how would they group the students, what would the focus of each group be, and what activities would educators integrate into their small group instruction. Both a formative and summative assessment have been integrated into the design. However, both are performed differently. For the formative assessment, that is simply just the facilitator listening to what participants are saying. The summative assessment, on the other hand, is performed through 2 observations, and each observation is focusing on 2 different things. The first observation will focus on the resources that the teacher is using, and the second observation will focus on the activities that the teacher is integrating. During the development stage of the 80 model, 3 things were developed. The first 2 were the observation forms that the observer will use while they are observing teachers, and both observation sheets, while they look the same, they are different because both observations will be focusing on different things. The third thing developed was a training survey, and the survey was primarily for myself and my facilitator. And once the results were in, both of us sat down and we analyzed the data and we looked at what went well and what could have gone better. And we even, if there were things that people said could have gone better, then both the facilitator and I talked about how could we do better for next time. Both a beta and pilot test were implemented and facilitated by my client. By my client being the facilitator, it allowed me as the designer to make observations and take note of what I was hearing and what I was seeing. At the conclusion of the beta test, I asked for feedback, and there were two pieces of advice given to me. The first one was to not have everyone use their laptop, which I agreed with, because during my observations, I noticed that participants were getting easily distracted with their laptops and responding to emails or looking up things online. And then the second piece of advice that I was given was during the technology and resource portion of the training, rather than just talking about the benefits and the challenges of the platforms, to also integrate the teacher perspective and the student perspective. So what does each platform look like on the teacher side, and what does each platform look like on the student side? During the pilot test, all the feedback that was provided to me from the beta test was then integrated into the pilot test. And I believe that all that feedback that was given to me truly did make my training better. During the evaluation portion of the 80 model, two evaluations were given, a level 1 and a level 3. For the level 1 evaluation, participants were asked 3 questions. How would you rate the training on a scale of 1 to 5? What is one thing you liked and supported your learning? And what is one thing that you would change about the training? For question 1, a majority of participants rated the training a 4. For question 2, a majority of participants responded that they truly enjoyed the fact that the training was very hands-on. It wasn't just the facilitator standing in front of the board and reading the screen and then moving on. They liked the hands-on part, being able to apply their knowledge. Then for question 3, a lot of participants responded back with not using Nearpod, since that was a platform that not many of them were familiar with. It did create somewhat of a learning curve. There are a lot of differences between the level 1 and the level 3 evaluation, but the biggest difference is that the level 1 evaluation was given after the training. A level 3 evaluation was given a couple days after. So this allowed time for participants to start using what they learned through the training in their classrooms during differentiated instruction. Participants were asked 4 questions through Microsoft Forms, and the dark blue indicates that participants felt as though they are doing better now that they've gone through the training on certain things, and the light blue indicates that participants felt like they were doing fine before the training. So as you can see, a majority of participants for each question felt as though the training benefited them and supported them. By going through all stages of the 80 model, it allowed me to design and develop a training that truly supported and benefited educators in teaching differentiated instruction in upper elementary.